am so excited to be here for round two. Somebody say two. Round two of our Generation Z series. Now, the entire reason that we are in this series here this month is because I want to talk about your generation. See, Generation Z is like 18 and under, so this entire room is Generation Z. And let me tell you something. The one unique thing that experts say about your generation isn't that you're slackers. It's not that you guys don't know about the future. They say that you guys are about to write the book on the future. They say that you guys don't want to be told what your identity is. You're going to show the world what your identity is. You know what I'm saying? If you believe that in this place, make a little bit of noise. Come on. You see, there is absolutely nothing worse than when somebody tries to tell us to be something that we're not. Or worse than that, nothing is worse than when we compare ourselves to somebody else. You see, the Bible tells us not to give the devil a foothold. A foothold is something where like the devil could get his foot in the door. And if he can get his foot in the door of your life, then he can get his whole body in your life. See, it's kind of like this. Me and my little brother, how many of you have siblings? Does anybody have siblings in the place? Okay, you guys have siblings, right? How many of you are the big brother or big sister? Raise your hand. How many of you are the little brother or little sister? How many of you beat up on your your brother or sister? How many of you beat up on your big brother or sister? Aha! There it is. Well, my little brother, his name is Chris. Chris is bigger than me now, but I still knock him out. Me and my brother, we always used to we have pool noodles, right? And we would always like play swords with pool noodles. We would have welts across the face and everything. And every time we got done, my brother was like, I'm done. I'm like, okay, and I would sit down and I'd turn on cartoons. And my brother, he would sneak up on me. Like, why do people sneak like this? They just sneak like that. He'd come up on me, he'd take the pool noodle, and he'd come up behind me and whap right across my face. And the pool noodle would wrap all the way around. And I would get up, and I would chase him into his bedroom. He'd close the bedroom, and he'd lock it, and I'd be pounding on the door. Well, one day, I'm like, I'm going to get him. Because he had done it like 3 times. I'm like, I am going to get this fool. And so what I did is I turned the brightness down on the TV real low so I could see the reflection behind me. And he didn't know it. So he sneaks up on me. Little Chris sneaks up on me, and he takes the pool noodle, and as he comes down, I Bruce Lee grab that pool noodle like, wah! Right there, and I take it away, and he screams, and he runs to his room. He goes to close the door, but I put my foot in the door, okay? He closed it, and he tried closing it hard, and it was hurting my foot, but I got a foothold in that door. And when I got a foothold, he's like, Mom! And I'm like, you're dead. And so I got my shoulder in the door. I got my right butt cheek in the door, my left butt cheek in the door. I got myself in the door, and I put that sucker in a stronghold like nobody's business. He's tapping out. I'm like, I don't hear you. My mama kicks in the door of the room. She's like, what's going on? I got a whooping like nobody's business. One thing I realized in that day is this. When I got a foothold, I was able to put him in a stronghold. And when you compare yourself to others, when you live your life taking on an identity that's not you, you give the devil a foothold. And if you do that long enough, if you're a wannabe long enough, if you act like the person that God didn't create you to be, then pretty soon the devil gets a stronghold on your life. And so many of us believe, we're wondering like, God, why am I so miserable? God, why am I so frustrated? God, why do I have so much anxiety? God, why do I struggle with depression so much? And the reason we do is because we are not acting as the people that God has created us to be. Let me tell you this, you will only change the world by being the person that God created you to be and nobody else. And that's the crazy thing about Generation Z. You guys don't need to compare. You don't need to be like anybody else. So tonight, I'm going to dive right into the story. We're talking about David. And you guys know the story about when David fought Goliath, right? Everybody knows it. David's this little guy. Goliath is this big giant. David comes from Israel. Goliath comes from the nations of the Philistines. And they come to battle. And you have Israel and you have the Philistines. And the Philistines would send out Goliath. And as they sent out Goliath, Goliath would mock Israel. He would mock God. He would make fun of him. And all these other soldiers that were trained, that were strong, that were ready for war, were too chicken to step out. David rolls up because his brothers are in the army and he's being a delivery boy. He's bringing the bread and the cheese to his brothers. And as he rolls up on the army, he hears Goliath run in his mouth. And he's like, who is this big-headed fool running his mouth right now? Who's doing this? And the soldier's like, it's Goliath. And he's like, aren't any of you going to do anything about it? And they're like, no, we ain't going to do anything about it. So David goes to King Saul, and he's over Israel. And he's like, hey, King Saul, why isn't anybody doing anything about it? And King Saul's like, well, nobody will step up. And David says, I will step up. I will volunteer. He's like the original Katniss Everdeen. You know, he's like, I volunteer. I'm going to step up. And he's like, you can't step up. You're a boy. This guy's been a man of war since his youth, and you're just a youth. You know, one of the biggest lies that you could ever buy is that you're just a youth. That's one of the biggest lies that you could ever buy in your life and that you can ever believe in your life, that you can't do anything because you're young. See, you can't be anything but the person that God created you to be. So right now, you being young, you being who you are, let me tell you this right now, you are enough for any giant that stands in your path. Amen? Come on, if you believe it, give God praise in this place. Many of us, we would walk up on those battle lines and we would see the soldiers and we would see Goliath and we would compare ourselves to them. We would measure ourselves up to Goliath and we would say, Goliath is like 9 foot something, I'm like 5'0". Or how could I even fight him? These other men of war are 6 foot, 6'5". They can't handle Goliath. How am I gonna measure up against Goliath? And see, we would do that. But how many of you know David didn't measure himself against Goliath? He measured Goliath against his God. Many of you have giants that are still running their mouth in your life because you're too busy comparing yourself to them. Why don't you take a page out of David's book and start comparing your giant to your God? Who's bigger? It's always going to be your God. Whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, whether it's struggle, whether it's fear, whether it's whatever, but you cannot be anybody other than you. See, you'll never accomplish the purpose that God has designed for you to fulfill as anyone other than you. Students, you are enough. So be you. Nothing less will accomplish the call of God on your life. This means that the world is watching, and the world is waiting for some of you, if not all of you, to step up and to be the person that God has created you to be. Be you. You can't expect great things from God if you're not expecting great things from God. Many of you step into God's presence, you step into church saying, maybe God will do something great. Look, you got to step into God's presence and say, I'm going to walk out of this place with a miracle. I'm going to walk out of this place with a breakthrough. I'm going to walk out of this place with courage, with boldness, with power, with strength. My depression's going to go away. My anxiety is going to go out the back door because I'm expecting great things for God. Let me tell you something. You expect great things from God, you'll attempt great things for God. You will. And David did just that. He steps on the battlefield and he expected something great from God, so he attempted something great for God. He didn't listen to the doubt of the soldiers. He didn't listen to the lies of comparison when he looked at Goliath, and he sure didn't listen to the current King Saul when Saul tried to make David look like him by putting his armor on him. It's found in 1 Samuel 17, verses 32 through 40. If you're taking notes, write it down, and you should be taking notes, otherwise you ain't at church, all right? You ready? 1 Samuel 17, 32 through 40. Don't worry about this Philistine, David told Saul. I'll go fight him. Don't be ridiculous. He didn't say that, but I said that. Don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth. But David persisted. I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and I club it to death because I'm an original gangster. That's what he did. Woo! I've done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it again to this pagan Philistine too, for he's defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. So Saul finally consented. All right, go ahead, he said, and may the Lord be with you. Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet, and a coat of mail. David put it on, and he strapped the sword over it, and he took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. I can't go in these, he protested to Saul. I'm not used to them. So David took them off again, and instead he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them in a shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistines. You see, 2 of the things that I believe that God loved the most about David was that David was a man after God's own heart, and that David was cool with being himself. Those were the 2 things God loved. Some of you think that God won't love you unless you're like somebody else, or unless you sing like somebody else, or unless you preach like somebody else, unless you dress like somebody else, or act like somebody else, or perform like somebody else. God loves you because you're after his heart and you're cool with being the person that God created you to be. God was happy that he was confident in who he was and who God wanted him to be. See, I can imagine that day when David put on Saul's oversized armor and looked in the mirror that God said to David, bro, you ain't him. Who are you trying to be right now? You're trying to dress in somebody else's armor. I didn't build that armor for you. You know what I gave you to do. Be you. And students, many of you dress like, act like, talk like, live like somebody else, expecting the power of God to move through you, but the power of God won't move through a fake. The power of God will only move through somebody who's real, who's authentic. And as David walks around and tries to feel it, he says something amazing. He says, I'm not used to this. I can't move in this. I cannot accomplish the will of God looking like you, Saul. I have to do it being me. One thing you got to know is that David was a shepherd. And yes, he had to rescue sheep and goats from lions and from bears. But he also killed them with a slingshot. If you don't know, a slingshot in that day caused a rock to sail at 120 miles an hour into something. He could break out half of a trunk of a tree slinging a rock, and the rock is usually the size of a tennis ball. So when we think of David running up on Goliath brought a sword to a fight. David brought a gun. We think that David was the underdog. Oh, no. Goliath was the underdog. You got to know that when he came up, that stone went sailing 120 miles an hour towards his head. I don't think it was like, boop. I think it was like, that's what I think. And he's like, you ain't dead? I don't know. I'm going to cut off your head just in case. That's what he did. You have to understand that if David would have looked at Saul's armor and been like, I'm comparing myself to Goliath, so I had better look like Goliath. Or I'm comparing myself to you, king, so I better look like you, king. And if he would have faced Goliath with the sword, he would have lost. But God knew that David had the skills inside of him. Why? Because God put him in the blueprint. God wrote David like that. God created David like that. So when he chose David, he knew that David being himself was enough to win. How many of the giants in your life are you trying to show up in somebody else's armor with? How many times do you step into school and some of your friends say, put on this armor? How many times do you wake up in the morning and your parents say, wear this armor? How many times do you go and you talk to somebody, another Christian, and the Christian is like, you need to do your devos this way, not that way, put on this armor. You need to pray this way, not that way, put on this armor. If you are Generation Z, then you build your own armor and you go take out your giants, because those giants that God created for this generation were meant to fall by your hand. Listen, you don't need to look like, act like, talk like anybody else. You don't need somebody else's armor. You need God's authority. That's it. You need God's authority. This isn't a call out for those of you who have been wannabes and fakes, because everybody goes through that sometime. Everybody does. This is a call up to take hold of what God has called and created you to be and to not hold back. To step up to everything that God has put inside of you, trusting that it's enough. And you might step on a battlefield and see giants and men of war that have fallen before that giant, but you got to know that you are enough, and the person that God created you to be is enough. Otherwise, he wouldn't put you there. Know that Jesus has won every single battle that you will ever fight. So all you got to do is show up on the battlefield and you got the victory like that. Come on, tonight, don't walk out of this place without your breakthrough. Don't walk out of this place without coming up to the front at the end of the night and saying, God, these are my struggles, and I'm tired of fighting these giants like somebody else. I want to be the person that you created me to be with your power, and I will not leave this place until that giant falls. That's got to be your heart. Otherwise, I got to ask you, what did you come here for? Listen, you don't need somebody's armor. You need God's authority, because giants don't fall for fakes. Giants don't fall for fakes. No giant in your life will tremble before you if the person standing in front of them isn't authentically you. See, the only way you're going to drop those giants that stand in front of you tonight will be to shine as a person that God created you to be. And the second that you begin to take what God has put in here and live it out here, something is activated. Your light begins to shine. And that light is a sign to every single giant that you're real, and then you're not playing around. You know, the cool thing is when Jesus talks about shine your light before all mankind. He says that. In Matthew 5:16, he says, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. He talks a lot about light, and every one of us looks at that as symbolism. But you have to understand that there exists a spiritual realm, okay, that you can't see, that angels exist in, that demons exist in, that heaven exists in. Everything exists in the spiritual realm, so much so that that's the real thing, and this feels like the illusion. And there's a spiritual realm. And when Jesus talks about there, when he says, let your light shine, he's not talking about a symbolic light. He's talking about a spiritual light. How else do you think the devil knows who's a threat and who's not? The devil isn't unlimited. He doesn't have unlimited power like God. He's weaker than the weakest angel, and his resources are limited. So he's not going to throw something at somebody that's not a threat. Trust me, if you're not walking for God, the devil ain't coming at you. It's only when you are serving God with all your heart that he notices you by your light. So if you aren't serving God, if you're being this person that God hasn't created you to be, your light might not be shining and your giants might not be trembling. But if you decide to say, God, whatever it is, I don't even know where to begin or start. And I'll say this. I remember in my junior high years being such a stinking wannabe, it was ridiculous. And it's sad, and we can all laugh, but sometimes we become such wannabes in our life through comparison to other people that when we look in the mirror, we don't even know where we start and where the fake begins. And some of you might be at that place in your life to where you say to God, God, I don't know where you begin and where I end. I don't know where the fake is and where the real is, God. I need you to sort it out. And then when he sorts it out, be real, be authentic, and receive his power, because you'll feel it like never before.